This is the Powered Up Podcast, show 66.
So one of the things that flipping my classroom has really allowed is it's some more freedom on my part, but also allowing me to give more freedom to my students. So it doesn't matter in my mind how you demonstrate that you understand this concept.
Welcome to a real world education with insight and advice from teachers in the game, where current and former educators reveal what truly sets apart the great teachers and what it takes to make a positive impact on students. Whether you're in pre-service learning, new to the game, or a seasoned veteran, this is the show for you. You'll leave feeling inspired to take action because we are powering education by empowering you.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Ken Ehrman, host of the Powered Up Podcast, and I am here with my co-host, Mr. Matt Flip the Mattress Rogers. Matt, what is going on, man? How you doing?
Hey, buddy, flip the mattress.
Do you flip? We're going to talk about flip classroom, but do you flip your mattress?
We rotate it. Ours is one of those that has distinctively a top and
Right.
not a bottom.
Yep.
So we are a spinning mattress.
Yeah, we're growing up in a generation of mattress rotators, I guess, now with these pillow tops.
Unfortunately,
so let's talk about something legitimate here. How you doing? What's new in this? What's new in the school
I know
world?
I was talking to you about this. I had a weird week. We had I don't think I talked to you about it in the last podcast we did, but I had to take a leave for my great uncle who passed away. And so I'm there, like I'm emotional. It's my last member of that generation, and I'm sad and all. And I come back to school, and I walk in, and I get presented a award. A large bank, it runs a teacher nomination, and I still don't know how many people, but I was told that many parents in my school district, maybe many might be a large brag or maybe exaggeration, but a number of parents in my school district wrote in and wrote nominations for me. So I'm going to a big banquet in May to kind of duke it out to see if I'm one of the finalists for the grand prize. But you know, it's been a really weird situation. We were just talking about, like, I have a wife who's a teacher like you do, and we work in a field where we have so many great educators all around us doing incredible things. And like, it almost feels ridiculous to be singled out as, deserving of an award. It's really hard to say, you know what, I deserve this. I do ridiculous, crazy things. You know what? I think based off the criteria, I can understand why my parents would nominate me. Creating experiences, these different things. It's really kind of odd. It just to be here and say, like, oh, educators across this country are doing incredible things all over the place. I don't know if you want to jump into it. I know you were up for a substantially larger award, all things considered, as a state finalist for Teacher of the Year. I know we've heard through your podcast journey, and again, I don't want to boost you up too much. There's reasons why you got those accolades and you deserved every bit of them. But how do you feel about actually having to speak on behalf of your performance? Because knowing you, you probably deflected it as, the kid's performance.
Yeah, it's definitely an uncomfortable situation at times to talk about that. I don't think anyone in my school really realized I was up for it until like the day before I left for the conference where they announced the winner, and my principal made a big deal about it. Just because I just didn't feel it was necessary, because like you said, you don't feel that you're better than anyone else in your school. You're just doing things maybe a little bit different. But to tap into that, that's actually, we've we've talked to now, I would estimate about 50, 55 different teachers. We're definitely well over 35 different states. I was looking at our map this morning, which you can find on our website. And most of them have been teacher of the year finalists. And the reason is I find those finalists and I reach out to them because I know that on some level they're doing something special in their classroom. Doesn't mean it's better, but they're doing something special and people are recognizing that. And that completely comes out tonight in our conversation with Bethany Petty from Missouri. Who is a teacher of the year semifinalist. She's still working through that process. She was recommended to us by one of our other guests who was a teacher of the year finalist. And again, it's not that these finalists, semifinalists are better teachers. They're just maybe doing things a little bit different, or they're doing things that are special that make people feel good, or they make their students feel good about themselves or engaged. And the emotion that comes out of these teachers is just so inspiring. And also the great instructional strategies that you can take away from it. That's what I loved about this conversation tonight. We didn't go into the lesson lens because I think literally the whole show was the lesson lens. I mean, she just shared so many phenomenal ideas, strategies, big picture ideas of how to transform your classroom, as well as a 15-minute activity that you can do in your classroom. And, this conversation was fantastic. She was an awesome guest. And what I'm about to say is not taking anything away from Bethany, but this is just one of so many amazing conversations we've had because we've just been fortunate to have these teachers say yes to us. And I just feel so grateful to be able to sit behind this microphone and listen to them week in and week out. And Bethany, she brought it tonight. It was a fantastic interview. Is there anything that in particular you want our listeners to take note of or to think about before we jump into that
I
interview?
think the only thing, and I know we talked about it right after the interview, one of the really nice things, so Bethany's in the classroom, not a coach, not an admin role. She is
Mhm.
still in the same position that we are, most of our listeners right now, which is really neat to hear. And so, because of that, all of the instructional topics, all those lesson lenses are through the critical eyes of someone that's still teaching it tomorrow. And so, we'll talk about Flip Classroom and Breakout EDU and other ed tech tools, or just the way that you conduct your classroom. Uh, and it is one of those that you just can say, she obviously is in front of kids every single day. And she obviously understands what it takes to make an engaging lesson that matches the kids where they are, even if that means that she has to jump on TikTok in some raps. I have some videos pulled up. I cannot wait till we're done this recording so I can check out some of the way that she's, again, meeting kids where they are right now.
Yeah, that's awesome. I totally agree. And this is one that I would highly recommend if you haven't before. One, subscribe if you're listening to us for the first time, but also check out the show notes page. I say it at the end, but I'll say it again here. It's powereduup.com/show 66 because she shares a lot of tools that a few that I had never heard of. So I'm going to link them all up in the show notes so you can check all of that out as well as her books and other pieces. So without any further delay, let's jump into that amazing interview with Bethany Petty. Hi, Bethany. Welcome to the Powered Up Podcast. How you doing tonight?
Hey, good. How are you guys?
We're doing fantastic. So let's just start things off super simple. Please officially introduce yourself. Let us know where you're coming from and give us a snapshot of what your career in education has looked like.
Sure. So I am coming from Farmington, Missouri, which is about an hour south of St. Louis. This is my 14th year teaching high school social studies. I've always taught high school social studies in the same district, same building. I've been in two different classrooms, but same place in general. First and foremost, I am a mom and a wife. I have two little girls. They are 9 and 11, and a pretty awesome husband who is very encouraging for all of my ambitions that I undertake, which is great. I just graduated in December with my specialist degree in teacher leadership. And I have an educational technology blog, Teaching with Technology. And I've written two books about technology integration and incorporating student choice into the classroom. So I like to be busy. That's for sure.
That's awesome. I was just looking back. You were recommended to us by Rhett Oldham, who
Yeah.
was our our second guest that we ever had. I was just thinking about him today because I was sending out some invites to teachers that I don't know, and a
Uh-huh.
lot of times we get yeses like we got from you, and Rhett recommended you, and Rhett was our. I was reflecting on that because Rhett was our first completely random person that Matt and I didn't know that was a guest on our show,
Oh,
and
that's awesome.
I still reference him constantly because he is just an awesome guy. So
Yes,
I
yes,
when you said
definitely.
Missouri, I made that connection to remember that he was you were referenced by him. So I know you'll be
Yes.
better than him. So
Oh,
I'm
wow.
excited to dig in.
Yeah.
So
No pressure, it's
um
fine.
so to kick things off really simple, what if I talk to random students in your class over the last 14 years, what would they describe Mrs. Petty as? Like, what would they describe your class as? And maybe even contrast what a year 2 or a year 3 student might
Oh,
say that or maybe what a year 14 student would say that your year 2 or 3 student
mhm,
wouldn't say to kind of
mhm.
showcase your growth.
Yeah, sure. So I would say, if you would ask my students right now to describe my classroom, they would probably say that I have a lot of energy and I'm a giant nerd when it comes to government and American history and world history and all of those social studies topics. And that's 100% true. I Oh man, over the past couple of years, I have jumped on. This will give you an example of my craziness. The TikTok bandwagon, and instead of making fun TikTok dances and things like that, I make government raps that I put on TikTok to help my students understand and remember government concepts. So this actually started a few years ago when I was teaching the concept of federalism, and my students just weren't getting it. They couldn't wrap their heads around it, and I was slightly exasperated, maybe. And I said, maybe I should just rap about it. And they said, okay. And I was like, okay, all right. So I just freestyled the federalism rap, which is now ingrained in all of my students' brains for the rest of their lives, whether they like it or not. But about the time we left for COVID quarantine in 2020, my students said, "Hey, you need to make a TikTok." And I'm like, a what? I don't even know what that is. And so they explained it to me, and they said, "You should put your raps on TikTok." And I'm like, "Okay, sure, whatever." So I did, and because I'm always trying to meet my students where they are, trying to leverage what I can to engage them in learning. So I made a TikTok, and all of my raps are now on there, and they were very, very excited last year because one of them actually went viral. There were 1.2 million views
Wow.
on this TikTok. Yeah. And so I immediately rose to TikTok teacher fame in their eyes. And they have bestowed upon me the name Petty Wop. Instead of the rapper Fetty Wap, I am Petty Wop. Yes. So that's just a glimpse into my classroom. You would walk in and frequently find me standing on the table in the front of my classroom, acting like a fool just to get my kids engaged in whatever we're doing. Because everybody, and I learned this many years ago, everybody isn't going to geek out about the Constitution like I am. So I have to do whatever I can to engage those students in learning. So if you were to talk to somebody I had as a first or second year teacher, which I actually ran into a student that I had my first year teaching in Walmart of all places, and she just came up to me and she said, "You used to be my teacher," and I immediately had that, huh, I sure did. And I looked at her, and miraculously, my husband was standing next to me and said, "How did you do that?" I remembered her name. I remembered where she sat in my classroom. I remembered what classes she took. And I'm like, I can't remember why I went to Walmart, but I can remember this kid's name from 14 years ago. But if you would talk to one of those kids, I think they would say that I was a fun teacher. But I think over the years, my confidence in what I'm doing and how I'm doing it has grown. Um, and they would probably remember my engagement, because that was like the big thing my first year teaching. I was flashing my engagement ring at them. And then they would remember that I was the pregnant teacher who got mad that she had to cut back on caffeine when she was pregnant. So that's probably what they would say. Um, But yeah, I always say that sometime after having my second kid, I lost all sense of shame, and I feel like my classroom's better for it because I just go and do and just let loose and have fun.
I think that's, you've covered so many things that I would love to dive into between, the TikTok and meeting kids where they are, as well as, taking a topic such as social studies that can be honestly, you know, uh, either the greatest inspiration. Hey, I learned so much that I just want to continue to learn, or just get me out of this period because, the instructor doesn't necessarily make it come to life. But I guess I'll go from the kind of end of that. You were kind of talking about early on how you had shared maybe parts of your life in your classroom, and that you were energetic and you loved to be there, but it took a little bit for you really to find that balance of I use these instructional strategies to get kids on my side, right? Like, you're using the aspect of TikTok right now to get kids to almost validate in their own heads that you're
Yes,
worth listening to, as
yes,
opposed to just really forcing, hey, I'm going to be engaging, so get ready
mhm,
for me. And
yes,
we'll
yes.
hope that we learn something
Mhm,
along the way. So
mhm.
can you kind of talk about, how you leverage something like getting kids on your side, and that makes your life so much easier, but that is, one of the hardest, but you know, greatest focuses of new teachers. How do I figure out how to get them on my side so that I can shift right into my job, which is instructing them?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, and I hate to sound cliche, but it really does come back to the relationships that you build with your kids. That, we can say relationships, relationships, relationships all day, every day, but what does that really mean? Well, to me, that means being able to actually talk with my students. And, of course, greeting them at the door in the morning as they come in, offering them, are you ready for this? A government instead of a peppermint. Oh, yeah. Uh-huh, uh-huh. I am that teacher. But, just fun little things like that to help them, connect with me, help me connect with them, and like you said, just kind of let a little bit of my personality come through, and hopefully by me acting like myself without any sort of, oh my gosh, I'm a teacher. I have to have this certain posture and this certain voice and all of this kind of stuff. Hopefully, by allowing them to see me as I really am, then they're encouraged to let down their guard and kind of be who they are in my classroom, and feel safe and welcome to be who they are, and to connect with me and with their peers. So I kind of feel like that relationship piece, I mean, it is, we know as teachers that building those relationships with our students is of the utmost importance, and that makes our job so much easier because then I can come in and I can be that crazy silly teacher who is going to sing about federalism, instead of just coming in and saying, okay, today we're going to learn about federalism and here's some examples. And and like you said, with social studies, it's kind of some people love it, some people are like, get me out of there. So I feel like for me as the teacher, I was the student obviously that loved it, but how do I encourage my students to love coming into my classroom, even if they don't love the content? So that's me, forming those relationships with them and trying to, just being an engaging personality to them because they may not love government, but they can love coming into Mrs. Petty's class. So that's my goal.
What I've noticed you've said a couple times now is being myself, acting as myself, sharing my, about my personal life, and actually thinking about something that Rhett said on our podcast that I know I've mentioned a couple times, is that, when we were talking about effective classroom management, he talked about that he was loud and abrasive, but a teacher down the hall from him was the complete opposite from that, but she had an unbelievably well managed class, and kids like being in her classroom because that was her personality, and not trying to do something because somebody else does, but really tapping into what we can do. Um, so I just kind of wanted to highlight that. But also, thinking about what you said in your intro about, in your first couple of years, the kids would have described you as the fun teacher, and I would say I totally would relate to that. I think students in my first couple of years would absolutely remember me as a really fun teacher. I think I taught somewhat effectively, but as I progressed through my career and I reflected and I refined my craft and I found ways to improve the way I was teaching, I found that I was still able to be the fun teacher, but also much more effective at teaching my content, and really tapping into that, but maintaining that role as an engaging, exciting teacher, and they wanted to be in that classroom. So, can you try to maybe paint the picture with a specific activity? You kind of talked about with your reps, but like something that kind of shows how you really engage the students in your content, but still brought in that fun and engaging atmosphere into it.
Yeah, sure. So one of the ways that I've changed over the years is in my government classes. I don't stand up and do a traditional lecture to my students, and it's as a teacher who's been in the classroom for 14 years, I mean, I'm like it probably halfway through my career at this point. And it's really at the beginning, it was really hard for me to not immediately teach the way I learn best, but to kind of take myself out of the equation and say, this isn't about what is best for me. This is what's best for my students. So I don't do a traditional lecture. A few years ago, I actually started flipping my classroom, which was is kind of weird coming from a social studies teacher because so much of what is a history teacher and what we are is, oh well, they lecture, they stand at the board and they tell stories, and it's great. And if you're a student that loves it, then you think it's fantastic, and if you're not, then you're checked out looking at the clock. But for me, uh, when I first started flipping my classroom, my goal was I wanted to free up my face to face time with my students for more engaging application activities, but also to be able to kind of help them individually with their learning. Um, I eventually changed from a traditional flip to an in class flip, which is what I run now. So instead of me lecturing about the Articles of Confederation for 50 minutes, I take our learning target, our objective, and I make an instructional video about it, 3 to 5 minutes. And my students watch that in the morning when they come in. That's like their first activity. So we have our 3 to 5 minutes of direct content instruction. My students take notes on guided notes that I created for them, like interactive guided notes on Classroom. And then we do some sort of like a temperature check in the classroom. So I have either like a Padlet, or I have a question on Google Classroom. I have a stoplight exit entrance ticket kind of thing that I do just to kind of see where they are individually. And then based on their responses, then we do a whole class review. So we do some sort of a deep dive, and that deep dive might be 10, 15 minutes of us reviewing the content that they had in the video, asking and answering any questions, and then extending that content a little further. And then, of course, at some point in time, we're probably going to play Book It, because, if you're teaching in 2022, Book It is definitely something that's on your radar, and for great reason because it's amazing. But we're probably going to play Book It at some point in time. We're probably going to have some sort of an application activity where my students are collaborating, they're thinking critically. I never want my classroom to be quiet. And that's another change from first and second year teacher me to now, because, when you're an early teacher, any sign of talking or whispering or whatever, that's a sign that, oh my gosh, my classroom management's failing. They're not on task. And now, one of the things that we say whenever we go through the instructions for the activity, I'm like, okay, can you work together? Yes. What should you do if you have questions? Ask Mrs. Petty. Okay, great, excellent, go. So I think that one of the ways that I'm able to kind of let down my guard and channel, who I am into my classroom is by breaking things up like that. And kind of taking myself out of the, well, this is what I want to do. This is how I want to teach the Articles of Confederation. It's more of a, well, how can I teach this to my students in engaging chunks? Keeping in mind the attention span of high school students, and how can I help them be in the learning with them, but then also help them apply what they've learned.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So, real quick, can you define what a flipped classroom is for our
Sure,
audience in case they haven't heard it?
absolutely.
And also, I made the same exact transition that you did from traditional flip to in class. Just real quick, why do you think that happens so often?
Sure. So the flipped classroom model, I first learned about it in 2014, which oddly enough was the same year that I started my blog and the same year that I learned that we were going one to one as a district. So all of those things happened at once for me. And my personality is I'm going to do all the things right now. I'm going to jump headfirst into it. So I did. And when I first learned about the flip, I'm like, this is brilliant, right? I'm going to get so much class time back. I'm going to free up. It's just I'm not even going to know what to do with myself. It's just going to be so awesome. So I started off with the flipped concept of the teacher creates typically instructional videos, and the students watch it at home, and then they come back to class the next day ready and excited to apply what they've learned. Well, that's great. Um, but that wasn't really something that was going to work for my students in our area, because I found like, and don't get me wrong, the first couple of weeks of me making instructional videos and putting them on YouTube, I mean, I immediately had street cred with my students because I had a YouTube channel. It was fine because it was the new thing. Oh my gosh, Mrs. Petty's on YouTube. There's her face. I mean, it was cool, right? Well, I didn't really have a good way to monitor that they were actually viewing the YouTube videos. This was before Edpuzzle. I didn't have a really good way to make sure that they were taking the notes that I was wanting them to take. So it was basically me saying, go home and do this and come back tomorrow. That was it. Uh, and like I said, the first couple weeks, it was great. So then, as time went on and things started getting less and less new, um, I found some of my students were having trouble completing their videos. So it could have been my Wi-Fi went out, or my sister had to use the Wi-Fi, or whatever. So I was trying to be really flexible and understanding, and I'm like, that's fine. If you didn't finish your video, just head back to this table, finish the video, and then you can come up and join us for the instruction. And it was totally fine. Kids were fine with it. I was fine with it. Um, but then one day, and I'll never forget this young lady's face, she came up to me and said, "Hey, Mrs. Petty, I didn't finish my instructional video last night." And I said, "Oh, that's okay. Take your stuff." And she goes, "Oh, I know, I know. I'm going to go back to the corner of shame. I just wanted to let you know." And I was like, "The corner of what now? Where?" We don't have one of those in my classroom. So I had one of those moments where you're speeding down the interstate and you see something that makes you need to slow down. Um, and it was like, "Arr!" So that's when I decided to flip my flip because, as a teacher, I'm kind of a control freak. That might be like a characteristic of teachers just in general, but I know that I can control what is happening in my classroom. I know that when my students come into my classroom, they are going to have their Chromebook. It's going to be charged, or they're going to have a way to charge it. They're going to have their headphones, or they're going to borrow some petty beats, we call them. I'm telling you, it's a wild time in my classroom. Um, or I can control all of those things, and I have no control over what goes on outside of my classroom. I have no control what their home life is like. I don't know if they are making dinner for their brothers and sisters. I don't know if they have a job that they have to help pay the bills. I don't know if they have 3 after school activities like my daughters do every day, which is just great. And you know what, maybe you don't want to go and watch a government video when you get home. Maybe you've been schooling all day and you just kind of need to be a person, right? So that all of those things together really changed my philosophy on homework, but also on the flipped classroom, because I knew that this was a really powerful instructional strategy, and I knew I could make it work. It was just about finding how it was going to work for my students. So like when I first made my videos to put them on YouTube, I think I had one video that was like 18 minutes long. And I'm like, please go watch this about the filibuster. It's going to be great. I mean, I'm not going to watch an 18-minute video, and I love this stuff. So that was the first thing I had to trim down. Then I knew that I had to have some way for them to engage in the video because, how you've got to have some sort of a formative assessment while they're looking at the content. So that's when I found Edpuzzle, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so cool! I can make the video, and then I can put it on this, and then I can add questions, and I can see when they watch it and how long it took them to watch it. And oh my gosh, this is so great! So I found that, and then I decided, it's just going to be better for all of us if we can watch these videos in class, because they still get the individual uh, time to view it. So if one student needs to watch this 30-second part 5 times, they can. That's fine. But at the same time, I'm there with them. So I'm in the learning with them still. If they have a question, they're like, Mrs. Petty, you've said this 5 times and I have no idea what you're talking about. Then I can go over with my iPad and I can say, okay, here, let's figure this out. And I'm drawing it out, for them, or just whatever. So I feel like making that shift from the traditional flip to the in-class flip has kind of let me have the best of both worlds, right? I'm with my students. I can be one-on-one with them. I can be working with a small group of them, or they can be working individually, and I can just be asking questions as we go. So it's really been awesome for me as a teacher, because I feel like by taking myself out of that, everybody look at me, I'm talking, make sure you're writing down what I'm saying. I feel like it's the learning has shifted from what is Mrs. Petty teaching to what am I learning today. And I feel like that's been a pretty powerful thing to see in my classroom.
I guess I want to jump in here and just kind of say, and both of you are to share, Ken. I know you've had quite a journey with flipped classroom, and it's looked, I think we've all had journeys like yours, Bethany, where you realize something is good in theory and good in many facets, but if anything, it's almost creating a bigger divide of your students and making it even more difficult to create um, support for extension, right? Compared to remediation in a classroom. And as you were mentioning, you're creating opportunities for extension for kids that did what they were supposed to, and almost punishment for kids that may have had outside factors, not necessarily ignoring. And we hear about that concept. I guess I have two things, and I'll let you kind of take them. From your end of things, first off, um, what goes into creating a flipped lesson today? Maybe how that's changed, whether that's even the hardware that you're using, how many takes you're putting, or where are you uploading it to? Are you still using tools like Edpuzzle to kind of again see if the kids are actively watching videos? There was a big trend that no one really answered. Oh, you need to teach the kids how to watch videos, but no one really actually talked about what that looked like. So that's one of your assignments. The other thing that I would love for you to tap into is you talked about, creating more time in class by the flipped classroom. So what were you doing in class? Did you feel like you were doing when they were expected to do it at home? Because that's a lot of time to make up. And what are you doing now that you have kids doing it within the classroom? Because I mean, I not to spoil anything for you, to watch a 6-minute video is probably 25 minutes of talking in the classroom when you consider discussion questions. Here's the concentrated information. You'd be blown away how little you actually teach in a half an hour, right? That when you don't have those interruptions, you have that video. So that's a lot for you to unpack, but how are you utilizing that earned time? And that's how I view it. You earn time by creating this distraction-free learning compared to what goes into building that lesson.
Real
Sure.
quick
So
interjection. Sorry, Bethany. Can you just clarify? Are you teaching a 45-minute or a 90-minute block?
we are in actually a 48-minute class
Ah,
period.
Almost got it. All right.
Absolutely, yes. So my like what goes into me creating a flipped lesson? So I've grown a lot with that as well. So when I first started flipping, I was going to a conference and I knew I was going to be out of the classroom. So I said, "Hey, I'm going to try this, and we're going to see how it works." And I prepped my kids, you're going to get this, you're going to see this, you have to do this, and this is the process we're going to follow. And they were like, okay, it's fine. So I made my video and I used my iPad, and I don't remember the name of the app that I used, but I had my presentation on there, and I talked. I'm sure 15 minutes, because why not? And I added it to YouTube, sent it to my kids, and everything was great. And I came back to class the next day and I said, "So what do you guys think? This is kind of this is cutting edge stuff. Tell me what you think." And um the overwhelming response was, "That was really cool that you could do that, but it was really weird because I couldn't see you." I'm like, "What do you mean you couldn't see me?" And they said, "Well, you didn't have like you weren't there. It was your voice, and it was you were just coming from somewhere." And I'm like, "Well, would it be better if I put like my video on there, like me talking?" And they said, "Yes, that why didn't you do that?" And I'm like, "Why would I want to? Why do I want my that's weird." So, that was the first thing that I had to learn was, okay, if I'm going to make these videos for my students, what my students in my classroom need is they have to see me. And I totally get it. You've had, classes where you have an instructor who is talking, and then you have online classes, maybe where you don't have any sort of video, and all you have to do is just listen or read. And those are two totally different things. So when I made my next video, I decided, okay, I'm going to make sure and embed my video in it. Um, and that solved that problem. So now I use Screencastify to create my videos, and then I automatically put them up on YouTube. And then I still use Edpuzzle. I add it directly um, from YouTube into those Edpuzzle lessons and share it directly with my students. And like I said earlier, my videos are 3 to 5 minutes. And whenever my kids are watching them, I always say, I'm going to double the time of the video, and that's the time you're going to get to watch it. So if it's a 3-minute video, you're going to get 6 minutes to do it. And the reason for that, of course, is because I want them to interact with the content. I don't just want you to hit play and go, okay, I'm done. Well, you got to pause. You've got to think about it. I'm always really caffeinated, and I'm excited just in general, so I talk really fast. You're probably going to need to pause me and rewind me. That's fine. You need to make sure you're taking notes. I don't care how you take them, but you need to make sure you're writing stuff down. So that part of it, I feel like, at least for probably like the last 5 years, has pretty much remained the same. Um, as far as like takes, I am a firm believer in a one take video. And that may seem lazy, but the idea behind it in my mind is, if I am giving a lecture and I make a mistake 10 minutes in, I'm not going to say, okay, guys, we need to stop this and we will pick up with it tomorrow, and I'm going to start all over again. I'm not going to do that, because that's wasting instructional time. That's wasting time. So when I make my instructional videos, if I make a mistake, if I say the Declaration of Independence instead of the Constitution, um, guess what they're going to do? They're going to catch it and they're going to let me know about it. And that's totally fine, right? So one take videos, done. And I've also gotten a lot better with, I don't have to have my hair fixed and my makeup done and everything perfect when I do my videos. There have been times when I'm like, okay, oh crud, I forgot I've got to make that video again. So I've set it on my counter and I am, browning ground beef for dinner as I'm talking about the filibuster. There have been times where, especially during the original quarantine of 2020, where my daughters will randomly pop into the video and they'll say hi. I'm like, okay, go on. And it's fine. It's totally okay. In January, my entire household got COVID. So I was sitting in my recliner one morning with a sock cap on, with my glasses on, and I was like, hey guys, I'm doing fine. I'm doing great. Well, let's talk about the legislative branch, So, and that just kind of goes along with growing as a teacher, growing as a person, and just having that increase in confidence that it's like, if it's not 100% perfect, it's okay. It's all going to be fine. Everything's going to work out. It's going to be good. So that answers your first question.
So,
Uh,
if you don't mind, I want to jump in and
sure,
just
please.
validate a few of those things with my own opinion, and then maybe Matt can remind you of the second part as
Sure.
well if you need it.
Absolutely.
On the takes, yes, 100%. I mean, I was the same way as someone who's probably made over 150, 200 videos for my classroom.
Yep.
I had the one that always sticks out to me is I was teaching long division, and at the end of long division, you have to add up the numbers to get your answer. I literally added the numbers wrong and got the wrong answer in my screencast. Kids pointed it out the next day, and I said, "Yeah, of course I did that. I wanted to see if you were catching my mistakes." I've never redone it. I used that lesson for 5 years in a row because my criteria for when I finish a flipped lesson is I look at it and say, will the students learn the objective? If the
Yep.
answer is yes, you're done. Doesn't matter
Yep.
if you sneeze, you cough. I've had
Nope.
people walk in and I'm yelling, get out of my room. I'm making a lesson. Like all of those
Mhm.
things, your daughter walking in, those different things, the kids will laugh. They'll enjoy it.
Oh
They
yeah.
think it's funny.
Fine.
It
Yeah.
catches their attention again. As far as the tools, yeah, it doesn't have to be fancy. When I first started, I was propping an iPad on a chair, which was on a
Yep.
desk because I didn't have a
Absolutely.
tripod. And for me, I didn't use Edpuzzle
Mhm.
because one, I wasn't really aware of it when I started in 2015. Two, it didn't seem necessary for my fifth
Mhm.
graders. As fifth
Mhm.
graders, I could kind of scare them into doing their work
Sure.
a little bit
Sure.
more, whereas high school you have to track that a little bit more.
Yeah.
And also the note taking piece. Like I
Mhm.
had to teach. People ask like, how do you get your kids to engage with a flipped lesson? You teach them. I told them you always
Exactly.
have a pencil, you always have a piece of paper in front of you,
Yep.
especially for math. Like you don't have to keep the piece of paper, but I'm going to be challenging you to follow along and do some practice problems. So, you were just like validating everything that I've ever thought. So thank you for doing that. You're
Woo!
making me feel better about
Yeah,
myself.
awesome.
Well, and I'll just add, and then I will lead into that second part of the question. We have a friend of ours, Ken and I, Ryan Anthony, who was a seventh grade science teacher. And so what he would do is over a series of lessons, he would, assign pages that went along with the curriculum that he created and the kids watched. And so on Friday, he would at random pick two or three problems from their coursework, and it would be a data validation. They had to enter the correct answer within a very short amount of time, short enough that they should be able to open it up, put in the information, and submit. And if they did the work, then they were fine. And that kind of again is the hey, how do I make sure that it's more than anything, you're just creating safeguards to make sure that the kids are participating in the learning beyond just we've all done it, right? Like I've had a video that I had to watch for school while I'm grading or doing other things. We all get those type things. So with that being said,
Matt, hopefully at this point you remember what the second question was.
I do. I guess I the reason why and Ken and I actually taught a colleague of mine, Brian, and he is a high school math teacher. And when he went the traditional flip classroom, his kids very much were high achieving. This was AP high level math, and what he was saying is like it wasn't a science class that you would teach the vocabulary or the content so you could spend all the time working on the lab. It was, hey, complete these problems so that you could come into class and complete more problems, right? Like it wasn't achieving anything, so he found himself almost two things: either burning the kids out, right? They were doing too much and he was accelerating not necessarily too far. I don't know if that's ever happened in education, but or, he was just feeling guilty that he wasn't using his time and just not validating the benefit of flipped classroom. So the real question really comes down to is what were you doing before in a, social studies class, in theory that you had way more time. And classroom discussions I'm sure happen every day, but they're not 48 minutes long every single day. So what else are you doing in that spectrum compared to, today when it's a concentrated in class, we're going to unpack what was in that video, kind of speak to how you use that the rest of that time after the video is watched.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I first started flipping, the application activities were very much like traditional homework would be. So it was like I would give you an assignment and you would respond to the questions and then we would go over it. So it wasn't, I didn't really feel like I was getting the most out of it by doing that. And I really think that that in addition to me starting the flip and maybe, like, trying to grasp certain things of it, um, was more of me still learning how to be a teacher. Because, why do you create worksheets or why do you create activities for your students? Well, because you want them to apply what they've learned. So that I was still kind of getting over the, okay, if we did this in class, then you have to answer 5 questions about it, so I know you're understanding it. Like, I was still getting past that point in my career. So whereas 5 6 years ago when I started flipping, maybe the activities would be a part of their study guide, or maybe they would have 4 or 5 questions that they would have to respond to, like in a unit packet or something like that. Now, the assignment or the activity is probably going to be something more interactive. So it's probably going to be something on a Google Slide presentation where they have to classify, or they have to compare and contrast, or they have to read an additional section about the nuclear option in the Senate. And then, based on what they've learned from the video, what they've read in the resource, what we've talked about in class, then they have to form their own opinion and then defend it. So I feel like the activities and the reviews and the application and the extensions that we do in class now, I really feel like they are more in line with my standards, especially my instructional standards that the state of Missouri has given us. Things like your students need to be able to understand the difference between this and this, but then they also need to apply this and this. So I feel like I'm able to really utilize that vocabulary in my lessons a lot more now, because I have freed up that time. So I talk to people sometimes and they say, "Oh, a flipped video in a history class, that just must be you lecturing for 45 minutes." And I'm like, "Oh, no, 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 no. That's not the point. That's not the point of this. The point of this is I have intentional instruction. I have a learning target. You have a goal. You have success criteria. By the end of this video, I want you to be able to do this, because you have to do this so we can move on to apply and extend and all of those kind of things." So I feel like, that earned time that you said, I feel like it is more utilized now than it was when I was doing the traditional flip. But that's a change in pedagogy, but it's also a change in me as a teacher growing and kind of embracing that a little bit more.
Yeah, Matt, I really like how you classified that with that, earning that time in
Mhm.
your classroom, and Bethany, like you said, that you're being very intentional. And,
Yes.
when I
Yes.
transitioned away from the traditional flip into the in-class flip, it was for some similar reasons, especially on the homework philosophy front, but
Mhm.
also what I found, I primarily did it in math. That's where a bulk of my
Yeah.
lessons happen. But as a fifth grade teacher, I did teach every subject. And so I did use it in reading and in science and in social studies,
Yeah.
but math was a bulk of what I did. I found that as a fifth grade teacher, some of my kids knew how to add fractions because they remembered from fourth grade and some didn't.
Mhm.
And so my intentionality was, well, I'm going to pre-assess, and then I'm going to have the students that don't really remember it, I'm going to work with them, and then I'm going to
Yep.
send them off, and then they're going to watch the lesson again to be
Yep.
retaught by me.
Mhm.
Or some of the kids that are like right there, they just probably need a refresher. They could just watch the video and then go practice. And then when I meet with them, we'll practice. And, kids that remembered it, already mastered it. Hey, it's if you forget or you're stumped, it's there in case you need support while you're practicing. So again, that intentionality piece I think
Yes.
is so important. And I've had teachers say to me like, why should I make videos when it's really important for me to have like relationships and engagement with my students? I say, if that's really important to you, then you absolutely should make videos,
Yes.
because you will talk to your kids more. You will engage
Yes.
with them more
Yes.
because you're multiplying yourself. You're not replacing
Yes.
yourself. You're
Right.
multiplying yourself to be able to be more flexible and dynamic with that. So
Yes.
I love the approach that you're taking with this, the insight that you're sharing for our teachers. I think for anyone that has not heard of flipped, I think you have
Mhm.
normalized it and made it seem very doable. And it's something that you can start small. Start with doing it as homework, and then you'll
Oh,
probably
yeah.
find that you'll naturally transition into the in-class flip, for one of the main reasons too, can be you'll have more content. The
Right.
second year when
Yeah.
you have more content, makes it a little bit easier. So for anyone that has not listened to our show before, this is a completely unscripted conversation. Hopefully you can tell that. But we do get a couple notes from our guests, and you made a note of Breakout EDU. You
Yes.
have two avid fans of Breakouts, Matt and I, and
Woohoo!
we have never talked about it on this show. So
Okay.
you have the opportunity for our audience to define what is a Breakout EDU, and why should we try it, and how do we get started with it?
Sure. So first of all, Breakout is fantastic. it is an awesome way. In my classroom, we use it as an introduction of new topics, and we also use it as a review before an assessment. So that's just kind of where we are with it in my classroom. So the breakout idea, and this is how I introduce it to my students, is if you've ever done an escape room or you've ever done a breakout room, it takes the same idea but educationalizes it. It puts it into the classroom. So if you've ever done a breakout room or an escape room, whatever you want to call it, you walk in there and they lock a door, and there are 4 or 5 locks, and you've got to find clues all around the classroom to be able to open those locks. And that sounds really great. But we can't lock our kids in a classroom and say, find the clues, good luck. That wouldn't work for a variety of reasons. So the Breakout EDU um, kit, or the box that you can use, is it kind of looks like a big fishing tackle box, and there are a whole bunch of different locks that you can get, 4-digit combination locks, 6-digit or 6-character locks, or directional locks, all sorts of cool things. And then you either create your own breakout activity, or you can use some teachers have them all over the place, where you can access them. So I actually first learned about breakouts at a conference, probably 4 years ago. And as typically happens with me, when I learn about something, I have to do all the things with it. I have to figure it out. I've got to use it. And it's going to be the best thing ever. And I immediately, like, I took a short lunch and I immediately went to the Breakout website, and I'm like, I've got to, I'm going to pay for this. I don't even care. I'm not even going to ask my principal. This is it. And of course, everything was like back ordered 6 weeks. So I was immediately deflated. And then I did a little bit more research and discovered digital breakouts. And do you guys do digital breakouts? Fantastic. And it's the same type of thing. You can create these awesome activities for your students, but instead of having to use a physical box, and instead of having to order all of the stuff and pay for all of the stuff probably out of your own pocket, you create it using like a Google site and a Google form. And the reason, one of the many reasons I love the digital format so much more, is that I can make it whatever I want. So if I want to have 6 uh, word locks, then I can. If I want to have a directional lock and a color lock, then I can. I can do it however I want to. So that's really my favorite thing about the digital version. But the way that I really approach it, it's one of those things, like when I get an idea for a breakout, it's normally like at 9 o'clock at night, and I can't go to bed until I figure it out. Um, my husband has frequently come in and just like closed my computer lid and said, "You have to get up in the morning." I'm like, "No, no, no, I'm almost done." But for me, when I'm planning a breakout, I have a template that I share on my website, and it's basically just a mind map. So in the middle, I've got, okay, this is my topic that I'm doing. So this is the U.S. Constitution, and then I've got like different webs that come off of it that are like what I want my locks to be. Okay, so the big things that we're talking about are going to be um, federalism, maybe separation of powers, maybe when the Constitution was ratified, all of those different things. And then I've got to figure out from there what tool I'm going to use or what story I'm going to tell to get my students to those. So I love using a Google Drawing with like hidden links in it. I love using a fake calendar. That's super fun. I love using Google Maps, trying to take my students on different journeys, and now throwing Google Earth in there also. So it's just as long as they don't go down the rabbit hole of Google Earth, which I found is it can be challenging even for me. Google Earth is awesome. I also love throwing red herrings in there because you got to have a little bit of fun. Um, and then we also use Snotes. I don't know if you guys know that one. S Notes, Snotes.com. Basically, you can make an image and or a phrase, but it kind of puts it into this weird image, and you've got to use arrows to drag and resize it so you can try to see what it is. Oh, super cool. And super fun sound effects too, which I mean, really make all the difference. Um, and then yeah, and then you build your Google Forms. So the big thing that you've got to remember is you have to have data response validation. You've got to use that tool, which is super awesome. But other than that, it's once you figure out what your main idea is, then you just go for it. And I've made, oh gosh, probably a dozen or more breakout EDUs, most of them for government, but we have one that I love to do in Western Civ. It's called "We're Trapped in the Past." So they have to go back. They fall through a time portal and they wind up in the Palace of Versailles. And now what do we do? And that writing the story too, that big the hook to get your kids into it is super fun also. So I love breakouts.
I'll let you jump in, but I just want to say if anyone listening wants to know how to make a digital Google form or a digital breakout through Google Forms, message me on Twitter. I will happily sit down for 15 minutes with you and show you how to do that because it really is easy. It's like a hidden setting that you probably don't know is there, but once you see how to do it, it's really not a huge challenge. And the cool thing with the digital versus the physical is you can have, individual, they can do it individually or it can be pairs working together, whereas one box for the whole class can sometimes be a management
Chaotic.
challenge. Sorry, Matt.
Well,
Go
and
ahead.
I just to kind of add to it, even having it's less a situation now in, school districts had to figure out device solutions when we went virtual for the pandemic. But, even having one device that you had the final code on was still a possibility. Whereas a lot of times that's not always the case. I actually had the chance to meet the creator of Breakout EDU, and his mission essentially was to transition to digital because he recognized that, having a set number of locks, there's only so many ways that you can take an academic based clue and turn it into a directional lock or a number based lock. So to transition that is, good practice on his end by all means. But from our end, it is fantastic. And as you mentioned, just a basic skill of embedding a Google form into a Google site and hiding your clues in different locations can really apply to honestly any grade level. It is just fantastic that you just have a different way to what I like to call is, they learn the through the clues how to be resourceful. So it's a fantastic early skill, but it's also, they are kind of doing acquisition based learning. They are acquiring facts and information through their research that they need in order for this activity that then you have to reference as the teacher at the end of it. If you don't reference it, then, the learning doesn't really happen, but you have a huge leg up with the amount of interest in that topic
Yes.
based off the
Yes.
activity.
Yes, absolutely. And another thing that, like you were talking about, skills other than just the content that they're getting. The big thing for me is that failing forward, because one of the cool things about the breakout concept is, hey, I'm not going to hold your hand through this, right? I actually give my kids little hint cards. Basically, it's a sticky note that says hint on it, and I say, okay, in 10 minutes, you guys can use a hint card, but not before then. And if you ask for a hint, the first thing I'm gonna ask you is, what do you know? And then where are you stuck? And then I'm going to give you a hint. I'm not going to give you the answer. I'm going to give you a hint. So the idea of, okay, I know that this is what the lock is supposed to be. This is what the clue says. How can I get that information into the form of the lock? But then also, if that little red line pops up under the lock and it says try again, it's okay. You can try again. If you don't get it right away, it's totally fine. And just kind of helping my kids to understand that, like as a person, not necessarily just as a student, has been pretty cool.
Absolutely. Transitioning, and I not to move away from breakout, but I appreciate, first off, I just want to say the covers of your books. First off, I love single word titles for books. So you have illuminate and you have create. And I want to kind of dive into create a little bit because it is, what I think breakout edu and the concept of flipped classroom is one of those skills that I think should be in the hands of every teacher as a tool of how you can provide instruction. And there's, many things in that ed tech world of how you could present instruction. But the concept of student choice and voice in that experience is really more of a philosophy, at least in my mindset of how you run a classroom. And I know that Ken is super passionate about it, that allows for special activities like breakout and those like type things. Can you generally talk about your maybe philosophy and how you felt like you could make student choice come to life in your classroom?
Yeah. So one of the things that that flipping my classroom has really allowed is it's some more freedom on my part, but also allowing me to give more freedom to my students. So it doesn't matter in my mind how you demonstrate that you understand this concept. If you want to create a social media post where you describe how the relationship deteriorated between the colonies and Great Britain, then go for it. Then do it. And here's a template that you can use. If you want to write a blog post in which you describe the relationship between King George III and the American colonies, go for it. Here's a spot where you can do that. If you want to make a text message conversation, oh my gosh, the best demonstrations I've seen have been in this text message form where one student becomes, George Washington, and the other one becomes Thomas Jefferson, and they're having this conversation on this text message simulator about if what are we going to do about the Declaration of Independence? Are you actually going to do that? Is this what are all of these different things that could happen to us if this doesn't go our way? So really allowing them to make the choice on how they want to share it really I found increases their engagement, but also they take a little bit of pride and ownership in it. If you have a worksheet and you make 30 copies of the same thing and you say, okay, do this and then give it back to me, and then I'm going to grade it and I'm going to give it back to you, what's going to happen to it? Well, it may not even make it out of the classroom before it goes into the trash can, right? But if you have been given the choice of how you want to demonstrate that you know what the Articles of Confederation are, or how Martin Luther impacted the world in the 1500s, then maybe you're gonna take a little bit of pride in it, which is really cool for my students to do, and it's really cool as a teacher to behold, just to kind of stand back and watch what they can do when they're given the choice. Because like me as a student, if I were given the option, I'm going to write an essay and I'm going to love it, and it's just going to make me happy, and I'm going to cite primary sources, and it's just going to be great. But if you were to give my husband that assignment, he is going to think it's the worst thing ever, and wish he could do anything else. And you know, when I started offering more choice, things that I talk about and create, um, it really made me as the teacher become more intentional with what I'm asking my kids to do. Am I asking them to create a social media post, or am I asking them to demonstrate their understanding of the deterioration of the relationship between the colonies and King George? So, like, what's my standard? What am I looking at? Am I looking for, ooh, that's a pretty poster, great job, or am I looking for their content? So, one of those things that in offering them more choice, I had to be really intentional and really clear in what I'm expecting, and where, like, my students have to know where they're going with the assignment. So I feel like choice and offering that has really helped me clarify my expectations for my students, which has been great.
What I love about that too, like the text message example that you gave, and just some of the other ones, and what I find with student choice in general is typically in those situations you're eliciting much more higher level thinking skills from your students, because it might be more, in theory a text message conversation is a lot simpler than a research paper with MLA formatting. But in those short text messages, they, like you said, they really have to understand the content. They have to understand the thought process behind, or guess at what that thought process would be like, between George Washington or whoever it is. They really have to put themselves in their shoes, and they're really eliciting those higher level thinking skills. So, Bethany, I could talk with you all night because this conversation has just been fantastic. But
Yeah,
I do
absolutely.
want to be conscious of our time and respect your time, and I want to jump into our last segment that we do with all of our guests every week. Sometimes we do the lesson lens, but you showcase so many different lessons that I don't think that we need that. So we're gonna jump right into our exit ticket. And the first question is, what is the best thing a teacher can do to make a student's school experience better?
Really to just be yourself, because allowing you to shine through in your classroom, and also to be an example for your students is really something that they'll look back on, and hopefully look back on with a smile. I don't sing and dance and rap. I use that term very loosely, for my benefit. Um, but I want to make that experience memorable, for my students. So just let your guard down and be yourself.
Perfect. What's the best piece of advice that you've received? It could be from a colleague, a supervisor, or even a student.
Oh gosh, so many pieces of advice over the years. To just take a deep breath, honestly, like unclench your jaw. It's all going to be okay. I feel like when I was a first and second year teacher, I feel like I was just like constantly just clenched, just tense the whole time, wanting to make sure that everything was perfect and everything was, following everything that was supposed to happen. And it just had to be absolutely perfect. And if it wasn't, then the whole world was going to fall apart. Well, that's not how it is. That's not how life is. So just take a deep breath, um, do what you know you're supposed to do, and it's going to be fine. Somebody said that if you are worried about being a good teacher, then you are a good teacher. So just take a deep breath, relax, and just do what you know how to do.
I think that's a great one. Jumping into something that I can't wait to hear your answer because I surely could use it right about now. So in a school year, we understand that it goes in waves. There are high times and there are challenging days that we are struggling to survive. What is something you could share related to helping educators power up through those moments of struggle?
Yes, absolutely. I'm so glad you asked that, because this is something that I've really been super intentional about during this school year. And it's really been a good thing that I am, because what a year it has been. I start off every day by getting up, and I have an acronym that I go through in my planner. It's GRIP. So the G stands for gratitude. So I write down something that I'm grateful for, and that could be anything from um, ponytail holders and coffee to an encounter that I had with one of my students. The next thing is R, so reading, or what am I reflecting on? Most of the time for me, that's a Bible verse, or maybe it's a passage from a book that I'm reading. Anything that I'm just reflecting on, I write it down. And then ideas, my I is ideas. And for me, it is I feel like I don't spend enough time in creative mode. I feel like if you can spend a little bit of time, isn't that a Google thing that if you spend 20 minutes a day, it increases your productivity? If you just spend a little bit of time thinking and creating. So I try to do that. What are some ideas that I have? Some ideas for my next book, um, ideas for a new blog post, or here's a tool I want to try, or something like that. And then the last thing is I write down a prayer for the day. So for me, it's if I can follow that grip, um, I can get a grip on my day, so to speak, and that's been really helpful. And also the the exercise component. I feel like that if I have not if I hadn't built myself up to be a runner and run every morning before work, I feel like this school year would have just like plowed me over. And I mental health wise would have been hurting to say the least. So I feel like those a combination of those two things has been really helpful, and something simple you can do to motivate and get ready for the day.
I really like that acronym, even if you're not using that one in particular, just that idea of that simple structure for you. I really like that idea. So it's easy to fall into facilitating a repetitive classroom, which you clearly have not done. So what do you think separates teachers who are constantly the ones seeking change, innovation, and pursuit of that change in their classroom?
Well, I think that, and this is something that I talk with my students about all the time, that I feel like as a teacher, our first goal is to be a continuous learner. That we never need to feel like we've got it all figured out and we're just going to settle into our, oh, this is how I do things and this is what it is. I feel like I'm always seeking something new. I never want my classroom to be stale. I never want the way I do things to become stale. Like with my videos, I make new videos every year, and that's partly because of my content area because government changes quite frequently, so you need to have up to date content for that. But also I just want to make sure that I'm constantly giving my best to my craft and hopefully that gets better every year. So that's just one of those things that I always want to be learning. I always want to be growing as a person, but also as an educator.
We are lucky to have conversations like this one with you, Bethany. And it's one that we wish would not come to an end. But um, as we are nearing the end, if our audience would like to continue to learn from you, what is the best way to follow along? I know you can kind of speak a little bit to your books and your website, as well as maybe social media.
Sure, absolutely. So my technology blog is usingeducationaltechnology.com. It's a mouthful. When I came up with that in 2014, I was definitely not thinking about how long it is. But it's fine. It's too late to change it now.
Absolutely.
So you can follow me there. I try to put out a blog post at least twice a month. And I'm always sharing stuff that you can hopefully use immediately in your classroom. Both of my books are available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. And you can follow me on Twitter. I'm Bethany underscore Petty, or Instagram. I'm Bethany Petty underscore EDUC and the number 8. I'm also, of course, on TikTok, Petty Wop EDU. um, so the things we do for our students, right?
For sure. So Bethany, thank you so much. I mean, we've said it multiple times, but can't say it enough. This has been a great conversation. Your students are clearly very lucky to have you in their class. I wish I would have had a social studies teacher like you, and I hope that my kids do one day. Just what I love is that you are recognizing that students aren't electing to be in your class, but they're forced to be in your class, and you're creating an experience where they're learning valuable information, but you're doing it in a way that's really connecting with them. So they're super lucky to have you, and your community is super lucky to have you to learn from them and your colleagues. We'll link to your social media, your books, your website, everything that you shared, as well as a couple of those other sites and ideas. I jotted those down. All that'll be found on our show notes page, which can be found at powereduup.com/show 66. So everything will be there. If this is your first time listening to us or watching us on YouTube, please hit the subscribe button, because we do have amazing conversations like this every week, where we learn so many different things. And Matt and I have said this to ourselves on the recording as well as off the recording. This has been by far the best professional development I've ever had over the last year, just talking to so many amazing teachers that have so many different instructional strategies, different approaches and ways to connect with students, and just doing it in amazing ways that we can learn from, or even just validate what we're doing and feel more confident in ourselves. So, Bethany, thank you so much. And Mr. Rogers, why don't you take us on out of here?
All right, as we power down this episode, Bethany, you left us feeling powered up. Thank you so much for your time. Everyone stay well, stay healthy. We are gearing up for, the quick decline. Maybe for many of us, it's testing season before that, but um, summer will be here before we know it. So take care of yourself, and we'll talk to you next week.